Attention! The National Weather Service has issued a hurricane warning for the entirety of the National Hockey League. Please stay tuned for further information from the Storm Cellar.
Welcome back to the Storm Cellar. I'm laughing because if I'm not laughing, I'm crying, Ray. Not the position we thought we would be in. However, I have not given up hope, nor should anybody else. The Hurricanes have a history of starting off the Eastern Conference Finals very poorly. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, you know what? So it's fair to say that a lot of folks didn't think the Hurricanes would be in this situation, meaning the Eastern Conference Final at all.
And
in fact, as I was one who actually picked against them in the last round, you know what?
Shame on you.
Here. Shame on me, right? For sure. But we're here now. And I too believe, because these were ultra close games, we're going to get to all of that. But first, we have a guest, a very great guest.
Good news before the bad.
Yes, 100%. Now, you lined him up, and he's very interesting for me because of my work history. I have like 20 years in broadcasting radio, and Joe Ovies. Joe joins us. And now that name might not ring true to everyone outside, like in the planet. We've got a lot of listeners, Finland, all over the world, people who are tuned in. But he certainly rings true and rings bells for those in and around Carolina. 99.9 is where you were at near the end. You and I share a history as far as how things have gone of late. and I feel bad for you. It was triggering for me too, right? So we'll get all into it. Joe, thank you so much for joining us in the Storm Cellar.
Yeah. I'm sitting here dragging just like everybody else after 4 overtimes on Thursday night and then more overtime last night. At least that one wrapped up a little bit quickly. And then, the last 3 weeks professionally have been kind of a whirlwind, which we can get into that a little bit later on if you want. So,
and we will, because right off the start, what we do here in the Storm Cellar is we put our guests front and center. We give them a chance to tell us their story. Now, most times we talk about how they became a Caniac, favorites, and things like that, and we want that from you as well, but feel free to take us through your history on air, because that's important too. And everyone, Raleigh fans, people in Raleigh loving the Canes, they've heard you too. So let's have it all.
Yeah, I'll give you guys the Cliff Notes version of all of this. My dad's a big sports fan. So growing up in South Florida, I listened to a lot of sports talk radio, 560 QAM, 610, back when it used to be a sports talk station back in the day. They flipped over to news. But QAM was the big influence on me, listening to Hank Goldberg and Jim Mandich and Neil Rogers and all those guys back in the day. And my dad would listen to sports talk radio while he was, plunking around the house. He'd listen to sports talk radio when he was driving to school. So I always had like a general interest in sports talk radio, but it was mainly radio, the thing that kind of pulled me in. I loved radio stations. I would make my own mixtapes growing up. So when I got to NC State in 1997, my freshman year, there's a very well-known college radio station called WKNC. And my freshman year, I did the thing that you had to do. You had to read news for a semester. You had to study the little FCC guides and take a test and all that stuff. So you could become a DJ. And, the only shifts that were available at that time were these overnight shifts for electronic dance music, EDM, electronica, which was pretty big at the time in the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, that was a big breakthrough time for that kind of music. So I enjoyed DJing that stuff at 11 o'clock at night. The name of the format was called After Hours. Mm-hmm. And while I was in school, I would listen to 850 The Buzz, which was the sports talk station of the time, which started up in 1998. Adam Gold, who I think most people who are Canes fans know him as the 99.9 The Fan Canes person with the Canes Corner podcast and Stormwatch and Aftermath, everything else. Adam was the guy who had just come to this market and got a job with 850 The Buzz and was doing, classic sports talk radio back then. I got this take, you call, we talk about it for an hour, and then we move on. I called occasionally, I'd listen to him and Mike Solarte, who was doing the sports bar from, I think, 10 to noon and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I got to my senior year and I decided, all right, I kind of want to make radio a thing. Unfortunately, FM music radio was seeing a disruption thanks to MP3s. I'll never forget going to the Collegiate Music Journal conference in New York as part of being the general manager of WKNC. And they had several panels where they were freaked out about Napster and what to do and how do you distribute your music and what's a radio station's role in all this. So I kind of had this thought, like, yeah, maybe my dreams of being an FM DJ were not going to actually happen, right? So, but I still was interested in sports talk. So I applied to 850 The Buzz. They had a part-time position available. So my first job was working weekends and going to college football games. So I would screen phone calls for the morning Saturday show and screen phone calls for this is for old timers out there. They used to do a show called Computers 2K. It was hosted by Amnon Nissan, and it was kind of like what was the NPR automobile show with Click and Clack, right? Car Talk.
Yeah.
So
I can't think of it.
I think it was Car Talk. Anyway, so Amnon was essentially doing computer talk. If you had an issue, you call up and they figure it out for you, right? Of course, Amnon's first question always was, "Did you reboot it?" Which is, of course, thing number one. So I would do updates, and part of my job too was going to football games and basketball games and what was called stringer work. So this was at a time when you had a bunch of different radio networks: ESPN Radio, Sporting News Radio, Fox Sports Radio, AP Radio networks, Metro networks. I mean, there was a bunch of them. And if you did enough, you get $50 a pop, So on a Saturday, I could make $200, $250 calling in updates from an NC State or Carolina football game. For Metro networks and AP networks, I would go to Carolina Hurricanes games because they always needed visitors' locker room sound, right?
Right.
So I spent a good chunk of my early portion of the career not going to the Canes locker room in 2002 during the Cup run. Mm-hmm. It was going to the visitors' locker room and getting 3 cuts, 4 cuts from the coach and the top player, right? And that one thing leads to another. I was part-timer until 2002. There was a disruption in the television industry around here. Mike Solarte, who I know has been a guest with you guys, he took a job with News 14, what was News 14 at the time. Mm-hmm. Now it's called Spectrum News or whatever, out in Charlotte, which opened up an opportunity for me to be the full-time producer for Adam Gold. And that's where things kind of took off. So from 2002 until April of 2023, I was, working in a proper sports talk radio station in various roles, from a producer to a co-host. I used to work with Morgan Patrick. My first actual full-time show was with the old Sports Pig when we added 620 The Bull at that time. And we did a show called Morning Mojo. And that lasted until Don Imus said something stupid and he got fired. And then they had to get back into a morning show routine on 850 The Buzz, which put me back together with Adam Gold. And in 2009, that's when there was a merger where 850 The Buzz ceased to exist. It got consumed by Capital Broadcasting and their sports talk station, 99.9 The Fan, which had gone online in late 2007. They had taken the Canes affiliation. I want to say it was late 2007. But by the fall of 2009, they bought us out, and they brought me and Adam over with a bunch of salespeople too. That's the famous Bomani Jones found out he no longer had a show in the newspaper. And he's like, "Oh, I guess they're not carrying me over. Got it. Okay, cool." So we did radio for 2 months before they, finally ended it in October of 2009. And from that point on, Adam and I got moved to the afternoons in early 2010. And we reeled off over a decade of really good radio up until 2020. We won awards. We did well in the ratings. Again, industry always has changes. And they decided to split the difference between me and Adam. They put Adam noon to 3. And they brought on Joe Giglio to do a show with me in the afternoons in the March of 2020. Perfect time to start a new radio show with a guy who's never done radio, and Joe Giglio coming over from the News Observer. So we survived the pandemic doing sports talk radio with literally no sports for an entire summer. And then, we had a lot of success doing that for 3 years until, again, the industry reaper came for me. They always say, and I'm sure you've heard this before, your radio career doesn't technically start until you get let go, until something happens where the show ends, you get fired, you get laid off. I mean, any number of things. So after 22 years, I guess it's finally time to start my career at age 44. So let's go. Let's see where this goes, right?
Listening to you talk, Joe, brings up a lot of things I had forgotten. So I was at NC State from like 94 to 97. So we overlap probably just a little bit.
Yeah, just a smidge, right?
The NC State radio, Ray, they had a collection of guys who would do EDM. They would do metal music. They had a really great collection of DJs for a few years that were fantastic. And then it kind of moved away from that format, probably because of just.
I could tell you why, because I was part of it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You know, like you'd mentioned 94. And I moved here in 95. I moved to North Carolina in 1995 because my dad was an IBMer. They shut down the Boca Raton plant at that time. So it was either here or Rochester, New York. And my dad was like, nah, I'm not dealing with snow. So North Carolina it was, where we only have to occasionally deal with snow. KNC was a metal station, you know, and I gravitated toward it. You know, as a 16-year-old in high school listening to hard rock, I really enjoyed what KNC was doing. But the thing about college radio stations is that it's made up of the population of the campus. And as tastes change with the Utes, the format will change too. And I was part of that. Now I can get into some nitty gritty part of it, but it was not an easy transition, because what you come to find out is that college radio station, and like most college radio stations, the student population is not the one who's listening to it. It's older demographics that are listening to that college radio station because they're playing the kind of music that you can't find on other radio stations.
Right.
And there's a push and pull there. And in 1998, 99, there was a move to get away from that metal association and more of a push to get, you know, what you would traditionally call college rock, indie music. And not that we got away from hard rock. I mean, I remember we were at the height of that rap rock phase. I mean, we put Kid Rock here on the map, Deftones, Limp Bizkit, Korn, all that stuff, because they weren't playing it on local radio here. I mean, 96 Rock was not playing System of a Down. I can tell you that.
They were not.
You were, right? But there was also, you know, Radiohead was about to put out Kid A. And that was a big deal. I mean, I remember when we got a copy of Kid A and we put that CD in and we just played it because everybody was so hyped. So we tried to split the difference of balancing the hard rock heritage of KNC and what people had always associated with while pushing it forward. And in a lot of ways, what I did at KNC kind of informed me the rest of my career, in that things are always going to push forward. The younger demographics are always going to come up, and how they consume stuff and what they're interested in is always going to change. And if you only focus on your age range or literally a dying demographic, well, then you're going to die with it. So, my career is kind of closely tied to technology. I mean, the only reason why I got full time at 850 The Buzz was because I said I would do their website. You know, they had an ancient website. I was like, let me do your website. You know, I'll do the on-air stuff too, but let me do your website. Like, well, okay. They didn't know what to do. And then that kind of begat the blog. I'm like, okay, well, everybody's doing blogs. Let's do a local version of it. So we did 850 The Blog, which had a really good community and everything else. Over at 99.9 The Fan, it was, let's dabble with video. Let's kind of, utilize the technology we have. And in a weird sort of way, dabbling with YouTube 20 some odd years ago, nascent stuff is kind of where everything is now. Podcasts, I remember having conversations with upper management about, well, you can't monetize podcasts. Now that's still an issue, but people consume you more now in that form, or stream now. And there was always a push and pull of like, well, we need people to listen to the radio product, not the online product, because we can sell the radio product. But what are you selling as the radio audience continues to diminish over time, because there's so many different ways that you can consume audio right now. Radio is the easiest thing that you can listen to. I mean, if you want to use a buzzword, casual discoverability, right? Radio is still the easiest thing. You turn on your car and the radio's there, and it was on the last thing you listened to. Now it's gotten better. Like I was in a car accident recently and had to, I used the insurance money to get a new car. And it's pretty impressive what you can do with Apple CarPlay now. And if I'm listening to something on my phone, I get my car and the Bluetooth is enabled, boom, it's there. But sometimes the Bluetooth doesn't want to work, right?
Yeah.
Radio, you never really have that issue. Radio is always going to work. So all these things kind of tie together with the technology pushing forward, and kind of where I'm at right now. Like I've been telling people, the radio show's done. It sucks, but we're not changing anything. The only thing that's different now is that we're just not on the radio. And in some ways, it actually allows us to just give you 1 full hour of good stuff, and you can move on with your life. With radio, you're doing 3 hours, and in a way, it's actually 3 1-hour shows because people are coming in and out of their cars all the time. Mm-hmm. So if I said something at 3:30 in the afternoon, well, the person who's tuning in at 5:30, because they're now getting off work, they're not in carpool picking up their kid, they're getting off work, they're stuck in traffic. Well, they didn't hear what I said at 3:30. So you have to repeat yourself, and you have to make it sound like it's the first time you're hearing it. Mm-hmm. Now, with technology, it's just boom, here we go. We'll give you a good solid hour, or a guest we can go a little bit longer with, because I'm not worried about hitting a commercial break. Yeah. All those things kind of shift in how people are used to listening to stuff. And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say, yeah, it sounds, I listen to a fair amount of 98.5 up here in Boston. WBZ is the local sports. And I always joke and say, one of my favorites, my other favorite sport, my other favorite love after hockey is they still have mostly a call-in show format. Mm-hmm. And I love listening to them after a Bruins loss, a Celtics loss, the takes.
Right.
It's amazing to me in a 3-hour show how you get people calling in, and I'm sure that as your call screening, I'm assuming you're trying to get some different content, right? You're trying to get different takes. You don't hear 12 people in a row say the exact same thing. That type, but you want a little more engagement. But it's one of my favorite things to listen to, because I feel like the hosts are trying to drive the show and push the show. They kind of have an idea of what they want to do, but because they're taking callers, like the callers keep resetting things. You kind of mentioned a 3-hour show is almost like 3 1-hour shows, and you're kind of having to go back. And when I listen up here, sometimes it feels like it's like that, but they do 20-minute segments, and it's like every 20 minutes, it's like, okay, start over, and then we're back to square one.
Sounds about right.
That's got to be super tough for the host. I mean, I think they do an incredible job.
But it also changes too. You do it on a local level, and you're dealing with callers, right? We didn't necessarily deal with callers we haven't really dealt with callers in the last 10 years, unless we're doing, I don't even think Adam takes calls anymore for Aftermath. It's just like in, out, let's go, right? Aftermath used to be pretty caller driven. I've hosted an Aftermath on occasion. That was definitely something
I called it a bunch. Morgan Patrick certainly would have known me.
Sure. I never wanted to do that show. I never, ever wanted to do that show, because, and what we see on Twitter is the reason why. It's an 82 game season. And if you're losing a random Tuesday night in January, and people want to be like, well, this is why we're just not going to win. And it's like, it's a marathon, y'all,
Right.
And even I get caught up in it too. Like with the Canes this season, I got caught up in the moment with the trade deadline, and Max Pacioretty getting hurt, and they got $10 million in cap space, and we're talking to Tom Dundon at the outdoor game, and I'm telling him, you need to go get a dude, and he's looking at me like, nah, we're good. Like, what? You got to signal to the room that you're all in, and you see all these other teams making these huge moves, and of course, okay, look at the last 2 teams standing, right? Like all the teams that made these huge moves that made a splash and everybody was freaking out about, where are they right now? Whereas the Carolina Hurricanes really doubled down on what they know they're good at, rolling out depth. And, Ghost of Spare has actually been a really good addition, all things considered, when we kind of went, oh, okay, he's a nice player. But no, he's actually turned out to be a really nice player for the Canes.
Here's Will Chatfield. Really, the speed those guys have, the mobility.
Yeah, and Dundon's whole point, and Don Waddell's whole point was they made their moves in the offseason to remake this roster. Brent Burns was the move. They got used to playing without Max Pacioretty. So it's really, in the grand scheme of things, it's the Svechnikov injury that really kind of set them back. But they still needed other guys to step up to a certain extent. Marty Necas has. I could stand to see a little bit more from my neighbor Sebastian Aho. Like, hey man, like it's go time right now. And in these 2 games, we've seen that they just haven't elevated to where the Florida Panthers' best players have elevated. But we can talk about where the Canes are going forward, because I'm not optimistic. You have that 4 overtime game, and you can make an argument that both teams are broken, and I mean, they could literally not walk after that game. They know they cannot put they can't put Lyon in or Leon in, right? It's all Bobrovsky. It's all Bob. And like after essentially playing 2 games in an extra period in one night, I mean, you could break them easily. And you can go to Ranta, who I think we all understand has won them their first series, right? In the way that he played. You can trust him. And I thought he played well last night. But when you absolutely dominate the Panthers in the first period and you only have 1 goal to show for it because the Drury goal was, I guess, conclusive enough to be offsides, fine. You only got 1 goal, man, that's tough. Like that's when you break them. And they couldn't do it. And that's where, I mean, I still think the Canes are resilient enough. They've shown that resiliency all year. But I am really worried based on not being able to bury a team that was just in a bad spot as you, with a goalie who was on fumes maybe, and all he did was he gained confidence. It's like I was playing Zelda earlier before hopping on here, right? And it's like I'm taking on this little mini boss. I'm like, would you just stop already? And that's Bobrovsky right now. It's like this little mini boss you cannot get past. I'm like, I thought I got you, but no, apparently not.
I love it. I love it. And you know what? You transitioned right into playoff hockey. I love it. So let's break it down. We looked at this, and 4 overtimes, it was a lot easier to handle here in the West. It was only midnight when the game ended. And,
Sure.
And not so far along.
I did not stick around on Thursday. It was my son's 12th birthday on Thursday. He's a big hockey fan. He's a big hockey fan. He's part of the Junior Canes organization. He has a lot of fun playing hockey. And that was his birthday gift. We're like, hey man, Eastern Conference Finals, game 1, let's go. Tailgated, all that fun stuff. And I was upstairs in the press box because I got to save money somehow, right? So if I don't have to buy a ticket, I ain't buying a ticket.
I hear you.
I was working, you know?
Yeah.
It's fine. And my wife texts me, and we've been having this debate as to when exactly we left. That's how delirious we were on Thursday night. You know, she texts me, she's like, yeah, the kids are done. And I was like, all right, well, we'll leave at this upcoming intermission, which I'm convinced was the second overtime intermission.
Yeah.
And we got home, watched the 3rd period, and I took a nap during that intermission. And I woke up in the 4th intermission because I have this weird ability where I'm like kind of asleep but not, and I can still hear.
Yeah.
So when I heard the change in the play-by-play voice, like something happened, like I could tell, and I popped up and I was like, damn it, they scored. So I did not stick around for that game because the kids were just toast. They were done. So
yeah. Amazing to the Caniacs who did. I was surprised how many people were left in the barn.
I'm
not surprised how loud the people who were left were. You couldn't tell that. You could tell visually looking at the seats that were empty, but the audio every bit as loud in overtime 4 as they were at the start of the game.
Yeah,
and the Caniacs in general, I think, are. I always say we're a small group, but a mighty group, right? We care and love our team as much as any other organization. We won't ever be the biggest fan base, but we absolutely are attached to our team.
Mm-hmm. No, totally agree. It's funny. There's been this debate that I'm kind of getting tired of when it comes to Canes fandom and traditional hockey markets, right? And it and maybe this is kind of comes with old age. You get to the point where if people want to not actively enjoy things, let them. That's their problem. You can't convince them. If they're that shallow that they can't, if they're supposedly, this is something that I've dealt with my entire career because we're not in a quote unquote traditional hockey market, and I did not grow up around hockey. I grew up in South Florida. My first interaction with hockey games were seeing the expansion Florida Panthers. And the whole reason why we went was because my dad was like, hey, you want to go see Gretzky? Hey, you want to go see Lemieux? Like that's why you went to Panthers games back in the day. It was like, here's your same with the Heat. It was like, hey, you want to go see Michael Jordan? Cool, let's go see Michael Jordan, right?
Right.
So that was my introduction to hockey, was seeing these guys that I associated on ESPN Sports Center as the best players or playing NHL 93, NHL 94, right? And just enjoying oh man, Jeremy Roenick is that dude in this game. And I actually got to see him in person, right? So I remember this in 2002 and 2006. where there was this kind of like attitude that because it's very gatekeepy, right? That because you didn't grow up in the right spot or it's a new team, well, we can't take you seriously, right? And it goes all the way back to 2002, where people treat Carolina Hurricanes games as some sort of like it's like a historical event. You're like studying things, like when the New York Times goes out and like, let's see what happens in this area, right? And I remember it was the Toronto series in 2002, where that's when I think the light bulb finally went on for like Canadian media that it was different. You know, they had the tailgating, it was a college mentality. It was cheaper because, you know, trying to go to a game in Toronto was ridiculous. I remember talking to some Toronto fans for that conference finals where they said it was cheaper to fly to RDU and get a hotel and buy tickets than it was to just go to a game in Toronto. Right.
I had the same experience.
So,
no question.
So those are the types of things. And I think I for some reason, I thought at that point there'd be an appreciation for, hey, this is different. This is cool. Then 2006 happens. Everybody doubted the Canes from the jump. You know, the rules changes and everything else. They go tape to tape. And they still were like, whatever. And it's like, why do we keep doing this? And I remember going on a rant about this for the Stadium series. Every single time that Canes fans are asked to show up, or this area is asked to show up, they do. 2002, 06, 09. Draft, everybody loved the embrace that people had with the draft at PNC Arena, right? Or the RBC Center at the time. Then the All-Star game, there's this, oh, well, I don't know about the All-Star game. Well, 2010, people showed out. It was the Jeff Skinner show. Again, Stadium series. Oh, we don't know about tickets. And I remember talking to people from the NHL, like, how many times do you guys have to come to this area and be surprised that people show out for Cane stuff? Okay. And I think we're kind of seeing it here. And it's kind of the point after 25 years. And somebody who used to work with the Carolina Hurricanes had done this tweet where it was like, respect us. You know, what is a traditional hockey market? I don't have it in front of me, so I'm kind of paraphrasing here. And he was trying to make this argument that, well, you know, 25 years here, and you look at the demographics and people who grew up who are kids. The Canes had a really, really good video entrance at the beginning of this year for 25 years where, you know, it highlights a kid who was like, you know, in 1997 when the Canes showed up, right? And it kind of goes through this life cycle where he grows up with the Canes growing up and he becomes this huge Canes fan. He meets his future wife at a tailgate, right? And then they have a kid, and now he's taking his kid to get it, all generational. It kind of proves the point that this is not a novelty. It's not new. It's 25 years. You got at least 2 generations that have come up. But my argument is, well, why are we so obsessed with being a traditional hockey market? The whole identity of the Carolina Hurricanes has been one of disruption, one that kind of thumbs its nose to traditional. I mean, 2019 with a bunch of jerks. Thanks, Don Cherry, man. Like that gave the Canes an identity that they're still going with today. I still see a bunch of jerks t-shirts. I see them, you know, they see them all over the place. So this idea that Canes fans are so thirsty to be taken seriously or whatever, stop it. Just who cares? If they can't enjoy it, that's their problem. You can't make people love something. That's their own issue. If they want to be curmudgeons, if they only want to, if they're hockey lovers, if they, as they say, and they just love the game, well, then they would look at these 2 games between the Panthers and the Canes in quote unquote non-traditional markets. And if you can't enjoy or respect what we've seen out of these 2 teams, again, that's a you problem. And if you really want to have that if you really want to have that conversation outside the original 6, what exactly is a traditional hockey market right now? Is Dallas a traditional hockey market? No. You know, Seattle.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some history. LA. That's not the
even this summer. We're gonna talk about, you know, especially for newer Caniacs, the original 6. 6 is the only part that is true.
Right.
Nothing original about the original 6. It was the original 4, and only one of those teams is still around. So technically, Toronto kind of went through some iterations, but
and then look at the Whalers, right? The Whalers were born in the year I was born. And okay, well, technically they would be traditional by way of the fact that they've been around for a long time, right? Yeah. And people don't want to respect the fact that the franchise moved on. Well, there's a lot of other teams that have moved on to other spots, right? The Nordiques, the original Jets, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Atlanta 3 times.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, so and to that point, Joe,
it bothers me. It bothers me that people are obsessed with this idea of traditional when you don't. There's a lot of NHL teams and they're not being played in quote unquote traditional markets. So people need to get over that.
And to your point, so the Whalers started out as the New England Whalers for 2 years. Then they moved to Hartford for 23 years, and then they moved to Carolina for 25 years. They have been in Carolina for literally half of the life of the entire franchise and 2 more years in Hartford. This is not the Hartford Whalers, relocated. This is the Carolina Hurricanes. As you said, it's interesting to me, and I think maybe what gets kind of sticks in people's gut here in Carolina is we still hear the Hartford Whalers, the Whaler Canes, those jokes. You don't really hear those about Colorado or these other markets that have moved on. People have kind of accepted it. And I wonder if some of that isn't just almost like some sibling button pushing, right? They know it gets to Caniacs, and so they're going to push that button just to kind of needle folks.
Well,
it's the same reason I give Avs fans that I spell Avs with an E, because we're not the Avenues. I'm like, it's such a minor thing for you to get upset about that I'm going to keep doing it because it's funny to me. But
so to your point about that, there's a uniqueness to this area that is based in college. This is a deep cut for if you're not from around here, you're not really going to follow what I'm saying. But NC State, who's closely associated with the Carolina Hurricanes because they share the building and everything else, it's been a long time for the Wolfpack. Since 1983 when they won the national championship, and they've had all sorts of head-butting experiences, NC State stuff, all that kind of stuff, right? And it's really easy to get at State fans online. And because of this kind of college energy that's around the Carolina Hurricanes, which is what you get with the tailgating and everything else, it will translate to the poking of the bear, pushing the buttons. And NC State fans would get really upset about Jeff Goodman saying something about the basketball team, or hey, State fans, you should know your role. And they're like, no, we don't want to understand, blah, blah, blah. And they get in arguments. I think that kind of translates to the Carolina Hurricanes as well. But there's a difference. There is a difference. Unlike the Wolfpack, which has really struggled to be consistently successful, the Canes over the last 5 years have found their footing, and they have their identity with Rod Brind'Amour. And it gets back to my original point. People can poke the bear, they can push the buttons all day, but really it becomes a you problem, because if you can't appreciate Rod Brind'Amour's work ethic, if you can't appreciate Jacob Slavin and what he does defensively, if you cannot appreciate Jordan Staal, that becomes a you problem. If it's just because of the jersey, you really are just like a name brand dope, right? It really comes down to that. It's you don't know if it's a good product or a bad product. You only care what what the little badge is. Well, then I can't help you. Now, I say that as a brand person, with my Apple products,
right?
But still, it kind of gets to that point.
Well, and this is where it's kind of, there's an interesting point that you bring up there. I think one of the many reasons why the Hurricanes end up in this place and this target, and they're always poked at, is essentially these critics are always saying, oh, the ratings are not going to be good enough because Carolina doesn't have, the superstar, quote unquote. They don't have the great players like the Oilers have with McDavid and Austin Matthews. And they're always looking for the greatest players because they think that's the only kind of hockey that's great. And the fact that Rod has created a system, a culture where everyone, it's like a plug and play type situation, and they still see magnificent success. The critics and analysts and stuff out there, they'll say, oh, Carolina's great, but there's always this whatever. There's always this, but they don't really have this, and they don't want to give them the credit that they deserve. Yeah. And it's almost as though some of these critics believe there is a God-given right for the traditional markets to be in the game. And if they aren't, it's going to suck. If you don't see the Bruins or you don't see, you know what I mean? That's what
So what's funny about that? So what's funny about that? And there's a reason why, shout out to Breaking Tea, with this whole endeavor, me and Giglio, it's opened us up to do some different things. And the bad for ratings thing cracks me up. That's why I was like, let's put on a t-shirt. Let's just put a red t-shirt white lettering, bad for ratings. You get the little cane storm flags inside the B. When people talk about ratings, and I know this from an industry perspective, there's only one sport where the ratings actually matter. It's the NFL.
Yep.
The NFL is absolutely made for television. Now, there's a separate conversation about how the NFL is treating their dominant position with television by trying to spread themselves thin with double Thursday night games and Monday night, Black Friday, Christmas, etc. Right? But the only thing that actually attracts eyeballs on a consistent basis, because it's literally made for TV on a week-to-week basis, is the NFL. After that, you really are fighting over really small margins. And what's more important for the health of the NHL, because people try to associate national ratings for the health of the league. And no, the health of the league is actually on the regional level.
100%.
It's better for Gary Bettman to have sold out buildings at PNC Arena on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
There was one dope who was clearly out there trying to get people going and for the engagement about, well, enjoy a lower salary cap next year. No.
Yeah. It's
not how
Andrew Raycroft. I'll name him.
Oh, okay. Raycroft, right? It's the former player, right? That's not how that works. Okay. No. The television deal is going to continue to increase because they still need live inventory, and the NHL can consistently give you live inventory. On a national level, that's not why the price of the brick is going to go up. It's not because of the national number. It's the regional numbers that go up. And the success of the Canes draws more people to watch, whatever the regional network is at that time, where it gets more people to check out ESPN Plus. That's why the price is going to go up, not the national level. And I'll say this: what's it to you? Are you making money? Are you part of that salary cap? I mean, is Andrew Raycroft like getting a better minimum somewhere that I'm not aware of? Like, it doesn't affect me. Like that what the NHL makes does not affect me in any shape or form. So why are people measuring? Why is it a measuring contest all of a sudden? You're never going to catch the NFL. You're not going to catch the NBA. So
well,
it's a dumb conversation.
It is a dumb conversation, and it just kind of takes out the fact that this image that they think that the Hurricanes have. It takes away everything from the product on the ice. Yeah. Just watch the game. Mm-hmm. Just watch the games. Right. The games 1 and 2 and 3.5, when you mix it all in there, some of the most entertaining hockey I've ever watched.
Yeah.
Like entertaining, exciting. It was keeping you on the edge of your seat. And I sat on the edge of my seat for the entire frigging game. Yeah. Like I was like, fully engaged. Can you believe what you're watching? But no one's going to see it because on a national level, some of these people are panning the whole thing. And it just makes me crazy.
It reminds me of, it's when people complain about music, right? It's like, people don't make good rock music anymore. I'm like, yeah, they do. You're just not. It's like you've gotten old and you've gotten out of touch and you won't admit it. Yes, there is good rock being made. You just need to go and find it because it's not readily available on MTV because MTV doesn't really exist anymore. Or if it's not being played on rock radio, hey man, that's you problem. I mean, you have all sorts of ways to engage with this stuff, thanks to Apple Music, Spotify, etc. You can find some really cool new rock bands if you bothered to try and had some curiosity, which gets back to my original point. You can't sit here and tell me that hockey is life for you and then just easily dismiss something because it's not the right jersey. It's really superficial, and it just shows you how people are lying.
It's a lazy take, too. It's not just a bad take. It's lazy.
Lying, 100%. Love of hockey.
I can't think of the author's name, but somebody wrote, I think it was for the Montreal Gazette a week or so ago. And, once the final 4 teams were announced, and basically his point was, I know hockey. I love hockey. Hockey is my sport. It's what I follow, but I'm going to turn off the TV and fire up the barbecue. And I have 2 problems with that. One is barbecue isn't a verb. Barbecue is a noun. You smoke barbecue. You have a cookout. You do not barbecue. Barbecue's not a verb. Canada.
Yeah.
Okay, not a thing.
Easy. You know where it came from.
If you're Mr. Montreal 24 cups, Habs for life, diehard hockey fan, and you're not entertained by the 3 games that have happened so far, you are full of crap. Mm-hmm. Plain and simple. Yep. Exactly what you said, Joe. You don't like hockey. You like your hockey team, and there's a difference because I have gotten into watching PHF, and there's some amazing talent there. I watch a lot more AHL than I used to. I took my son to several ECAHL games this year. NHL is not the end all be all of hockey, and your one team is certainly not the end all be all of hockey.
No.
If you're just like, okay, well, my team's out, I'm done. It's fine to be a casual hockey fan. Ray and I say all the time, bandwagon fans are always welcome, because the only way you get to be a real fan is to first be a bandwagon fan. You hop on, you dip your toe in the water, you find you like it, you go a little deeper, and then at some point you're all in. And that's wonderful. So casual hockey fans are awesome.
I can tell you from the jump. I can tell you from the jump, when the Canes are out, we don't talk about hockey in this area. We don't talk about hockey in this market. And that's fine. It's people are Canes fans.
Yeah.
That's good, because that's okay. That's okay. That doesn't mean they're consuming NHL radio all day or watching NHL Network. It just means they're into the Canes. They're a part of the community. It's something to talk about and relate with other people. But I can tell you, if the Canes were not in this run, if they weren't in the Eastern Conference Final, Giglio and I would not be talking about hockey right now, unless it was from something crazy gambling happens.
Deep dark secret from Boston for all of our listeners. When the Bruins got eliminated, guess who also doesn't talk about hockey right now? Boston Sports Radio has not talked about hockey in weeks. They were talking about the Taylor Swift concert at Gillette 2 nights ago, but they are not talking about the Bruins unless somebody calls in to complain about what they're going to do with their totally screwed up salary structure for next year. Like, you get the occasional call, but as soon as the Bruins got eliminated, and you had a 48 hours of people wanting to call in and gripe, and then they were on. It is Red Sox and Celtics. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah. And you're right. That's just human nature. I mean, people like to pin that on the small markets and non-traditional markets and all those things. That's just, you can love the sport, but you're right. It's the vast majority of fans, right? There's, I forgot, 4.5 million people in Boston compared to like 1, I think, in the Triangle, or 1.5 or something like that. So yeah, like we can both sell 20,000 tickets, right? You can pack your barn. That's not a problem. But it's not like there's a million people hanging on hockey day in and day out. Most hockey fans, like most sports fans, are fairly casual fans. They want to vote for, they want to root for their team. They're going to do the thing. They'll keep up, they'll keep up with the scores and all. Like my dad's like, oh, I watched a little bit of the Western Conference Finals the other night. But that's because golf wasn't on. That wasn't because he's a diehard hockey fan, and that's okay.
Brad,
it's the way it's always been.
Yeah, I've got to circle back, Brad. I've never heard anyone on this program reference the team that shall not be named in any way, shape, or form, as many ways as you did in about a 10-second span. And I'll say that is why I reference them as the team that shall not be named. We'll just leave it there, because that's the type of thing that you hear from that community. If it's not them, it's not good. It doesn't even exist. And
anybody who starts out there arguing with, we have 24 cups, I already know I'm going to win the argument. 100%.
100%.
That's an easy one. That's
So there was, I want to do a tiny bit of analysis of the first 2 games.
We have to.
We just on one point in particular, and it was referencing officials and the way the games have been called. Now, I'm going to throw this out. All of our podcast listeners, I know we have some artistic ones. I would love for a comic book style meme to be created that basically describes the situation facing the refs. We always say there's inconsistencies. The refs don't even know the rules. I argue that they do know the rules. The problem is that there are 4 separate rule books. There is the regular season rule book. There is the playoffs book. There is the playoff overtime book. And then there's just the one sheet of paper where it's called Prison Rules Hockey. and Mike Solarte, he called it Prison Rules Hockey. I laughed. I'm like, yes, that's what this is. The refs don't need to remember any of the other rules in the game that you see so often, unless the puck goes over the glass or someone egregiously, and it has to be an ultra high level, prevents a surefire goal from happening, that's when they're going to blow the whistle. Otherwise, all of the after the whistle nonsense that we've seen over and over again, the checks from behind, the little trips and slashes that you see that are all going on, if they're not directly tied to a possible goal, they're not calling it. And we've had a lot of people that are upset about how the penalties were called. And I'll reference the last night's game. People are upset, rightfully so, for all the crap that was going on after the whistle, the punches, the shots, or whatever. And then they look at KK, who is clearly out of position, hooking the guy. He took the best penalty of the night because that was a goal.
Yeah,
there was a
you
goal
take that
coming
penalty every time.
Every time, right?
Yeah.
And it was I was finally glad to see. I was actually praising officials because in these two games, they actually had the courage to blow the whistle at the right time. You look at Toronto would argue the officiating, especially as it refers to the Panthers, they didn't follow the rule book, which is, Agudas, and I hate saying that name now because I hate him. When he was holding that stick for so long, the ref's looking right at it. Cousins goes in and scores, and where was the penalty? Like that was the one that really, really had to be called and went by the wayside. I was just glad that they were calling it the way that it should be, that they had the courage to do it, because so many times they swallow their whistles and again, prison rules. Like Mike said, it was whatever. I wanted to get your take. Really, we're looking at all of this. The officials, not the problem for the Hurricanes and where they are.
No, the officials are never the problem across all sports. Okay. I think what it ultimately comes down to is, and I only know this because my son has started playing hockey. All right. So my relationship with hockey has always been from it's work. I mean, I enjoy it as a fan. After 2006, the Carolina Hurricanes became the one thing I allowed myself to just be a fan of. Right. With State, Carolina, Duke, it's not that I'm going out of my way to be quote unquote objective. You do this long enough, you stop caring. The only thing I care about is it entertaining? What gives me the best possible thing to talk about? Oh, Duke and Carolina are playing in the Final Four game? Hell yeah, let's go. I don't care who wins. Just give me drama. All right. So the Canes are the one thing I've allowed myself to be a fan of. So as witnessed by the fact that
the gear.
I love the shirt. Yeah,
hoodie and all
he's
that
wearing
stuff.
the Stormy and the Mr. Wolf
Stormy
shirt,
which I wanted that to be the outdoor game, but whatever. That's another time. That's another topic for another day. So watching hockey from a youth perspective, house league, the kids are basically just kind of running around the ice. You see it. At first, it's everybody's chasing the puck, and then it becomes, all right, everybody's playing their positions. But it happens so slow in comparison to the professionals. You actually gain an appreciation for how these things tend to work. All right.
Yep.
And I would actually recommend, if you're in the area and you want to get a better appreciation for hockey, go watch a youth game at Invisalign Arena, Wake Competition Center. They sell beer, so you can go get yourself a Storm Brew. Still $5 at Wake Competition Center.
Look at that.
$8.50. Still $5 at Wake Competition Center. And just settle in and watch a house league game, a junior Canes game, whatever. It happens so slowly that you get a better sense of what's taking place. And there's one consistency. Players can get bigger. They can get faster. You can see some amazing skill. But at the end of the day, the puck is dumb. Okay. The puck is going to do some stupid crap.
Yeah.
And we actually just talked to Rod Brindamore last week. Giglio and I talked to Rod Brindamore last week, and he was talking about XYZ. And I still said, yeah, but if it doesn't bounce your way, you're screwed. Or if it goes off the post, like how many times have we seen that in the last couple of games? Or last night in overtime in the winter, I mean, how many times does Brent Burns and Jacob Slavin and the stick get stuck in a freaking skate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hockey's stupid. Hockey is stupid. And once you accept that the game is stupid, you can go into a Zen place. Now, Brendan Moore calls it organized chaos. Yeah. And you see that play out in their philosophy, in that if you can just create more opportunities in front of their net, you hope that the organized chaos will break your way. Unfortunately for the Carolina Hurricanes in these first two games, some of that organized chaos has not broken their way. That's not to say they don't have a chance to do it in Florida, right? But that to me is where you have to eliminate ref conversations. Let's look at the opportunities they have that didn't break their way, whether it's what happened with the skate getting with the stick getting stuck in the stick, how many posts were hit, how many whiffs, if you're just a half second faster, right? So, on an open net. There was a sequence in game one where Kotkaniemi's on his knees making an amazing play.
Pass that
an incredible pass that if they're just a little bit quicker, it happens. So that to me is that's what I focus on in wins and losses. It's how much of that stupidity ended up favoring you and how much of it ended up screwing you. And unfortunately for the Canes, in two games, they have not been on the receiving end of the stupidity.
Yeah. I would say, Ray, that the officiating is about as good as it's going to get in NHL, I think, for these last two games. I can't really complain. There's a couple individual things you can look at, but I think that's gone both ways. Marty Natchez did take a pretty good punch last night. I was definitely kind of like, okay, like that's a punch. Like that's a real, I'm a little surprised that wasn't called. But for the most part, the officials have an impossible job with an impossibly fast game. We've said before, we love Rod's idea, like put a couple guys up in the booth to review things because that's the only way to really get the calls right. But officiating has been, I thought, overall pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Florida's been roughing it up. That's kind of, we knew that's what they were going to do. The good news for the Canes, okay, right? I don't think any Caniac expect to be down 0-2. 1-1 maybe, I said Canes in 6. I think you said Canes in 7.
I did.
You can't get to either of those games unless you lose at least 2. The fact that you lose the first 2, like, okay, that's kind of depressing as a fan. But for the players, they know what's up. If anything, I think they're going to be more determined. The big storyline for me thus far is Bobrovsky. It's always been like, what's he going to do in the playoffs? Is he going to earn that like $10 million? And he never really has. He's playing at 18 goals above expected. The Canes should have 11 or 12 goals at this point in the series.
No question.
And they have 2. And and Joe just said, you can count the number of whiffs and half open nets in posts and stuff. You need 2 or 3 hands at least in these 2 games. Half a second here or there, a quarter inch, half an inch here or there, and it's a totally different series. So given that, Mike Solarte made a big deal about don't include Patches, right? Because he was only around for 5 games.
Yeah,
I still include him. Like, he was meant to be the guy who was going to put the biscuit in the basket. He's not around. You lose Svechnikov. You lose the Turbo and get through. The Hurricanes and the Panthers are both playing with house money. They should both be playing loose. The Hurricanes should not be in these conference finals given the injuries. I mean,
I don't know. I don't agree with that.
Based on Rod's system, I would say based on Rod's system, you could make an argument, and I'm going to let Joe do that. When you lose, we don't have a McDavid or a Draisaitl, right? And Ray and I have talked about this a bunch. When you build around superstar players and they get hurt, that's where you get really broken down. The Hurricanes don't do that. They can play next man up. McEachern has been fantastic. I love seeing him back up in the lineup.
Very good.
Yeah.
But if you would have told me when Svech went down, Brad, don't worry, you're going to be this Eastern Conference Finals, I probably would not have believed you. Florida definitely was playing with house money, right? They were the 17th best team in the league there until the very end. And they scooted in and it just caught fire, and Bobrovsky has been the man. The good news for the Canes are they should play fast and loose. Like, this, to me, is a successful season given the injury to Andre. The fact that Turbo was out and is now back in is fine, but I mean, losing him, I mean, that really was a big kicker for the Devil series. The Hurricanes are 3-2 in away games this year.
Yeah,
like, it's not the 0-7 run or whatever. Like, they're actually playing, and Florida is 2-3 at home.
Yep.
So the next 2 games, home ice advantage tends to be a big deal in hockey. It feels that way. That's
not in this series,
but not in this series. The Hurricanes They could go down to Florida and they could lose 2. They could go down to Florida split or win 2. And I don't know that I would be super surprised at any of those. If they lost both of them, that would surprise me the most because they're
not getting swept.
Good,
they're not getting
right?
swept.
But
they're not going to get swept.
Could they go down there and you just need one? All right, get one and then get a second one. If you can go down there in game 3 and get 3 or 4 goals in Bobrovsky and just get him, just crack him. It reminds me of the Montreal series when they couldn't get it past. It was a Price. Hue.
Not Price. No, it wasn't.
Oh gosh, now I'm blanking on my Habs goaltender.
Jose Theodore.
Thank you, Theodore. If you can just stone in the Canes and stone in the Canes and stone in the Canes, and then boom, there's a crack in the dam, and then they exploit it, right? And then his confidence is shook, and then they go on to win that series. That's all you need for Bobrovsky, because as good as he's playing, he is not this good regularly. He's playing above. All you have to do is bring him back down to earth, and you can win the series. I do want to hear Joe, because Joe feels differently about the ECF, and I'd love to hear, kind of your thought on the expectation angle.
Yeah, I don't buy the house money for the Hurricanes. This is a team that has made moves consistently over the last 5 years to get back to the Eastern Conference Finals or get to the Stanley Cup. I'll go back to that conversation we had with Dundon at the Stadium Series, where I was kind of poking him on making a move because you have a window, and their argument is, no, our window isn't going to close. We feel that our window is going to stay open a little bit longer than you think. That's why we're not going to sell the future. But you got to remember, they made all these moves to get further. They don't bring Brent Burns on because otherwise. They don't get Freddie Anderson. They don't keep upgrading their goaltender situation because they feel otherwise. They feel that they have an opportunity now. And to your point about depth, that's their move. And I feel like that this is actually a veteran group, all things considered. They have the horror stories of last year and the year before that. Now, the latest thing they have to overcome is the fact that, remember, going into this playoff year, it was, can they win on the road? Because they hadn't done that, right? Well, they finally did. And then now it's, my goodness, you haven't won an Eastern Conference Finals game since 2006. You got 10 conference finals losses in a row, going all the way back to 2009, 2019, and now, right? So all these things have kind of loomed over the Canes, and they've been able to overcome them. So this is now just the latest instance where they show their resiliency, which has been consistent for them all year. Yeah, so I feel that they're not playing with house money. There's an expectation that they want to get to the cup, and the bracket kind of broke their way. Now they have to go and take advantage of it. Florida is playing with house money, right? They took advantage. They got 2 advantages to play with house money. The classic President's Trophy curse, right? Yeah. And then not a fat and happy, but a what do I do with my hands moment with Toronto, right? So like, oh, we won a series finally, and then they didn't know what to do after that. I mean, they won a game, when it was time, like up against the wall. So they took advantage of that. So I feel like I looked at this with the Panthers going, yeah, they shouldn't be here. You should now go out there and take care of it. But Paul Maurice deserves a lot of credit. Paul Maurice has had an entire career of being an underdog, going all the way back to his time with the Canes in 2002, obviously, and then in 2009, and what they're doing with Florida. Because here's the thing that you have to ask. Where are these 2 teams going to be next year? Do you really expect the Florida Panthers to be good next year after what they just did? I mean, this is flash in the pan stuff. I mean, I think 2009, like, oh my goodness, they did this. And then they were terrible in 2010. So the Canes were going to be expected to be back here next year, another crack at it. So it's almost like Washington in a way. Washington was in this mode and they kept kind of bumping up against the door and they couldn't get through, right? Until they finally did. Colorado was kind of in the same boat too. This young core, expectations, can they make this happen? And they finally did.
Tampa Bay a couple years before they won their cups was in the same position.
Yeah, so I feel like
right there, but
position. That's why I feel like the Canes are in that same position. That's why I don't believe in the idea that they weren't supposed to be here. No, they were. They just didn't get here the way we thought they'd get here. There's a distinction.
And I only say that really because of the injury to Svechnikov and then Turbo. It's our preseason expectations for Ray and I were anything short of an Eastern Conference Finals was a failure.
I agree.
That only changed because of the injuries, right? Max and Svetch go out, and it's like, okay, now, like that's some serious horsepower you're losing. But I otherwise I agree with you. Like before those injuries, it was an Eastern Conference Finals minimum, like if not a Stanley Cup Finals, at least just get there.
Yep. I'm in agreement. I said the same thing. Eastern Conference Finals are bust. After that point, you're taking on a team that's just as good as you, and things can go crazy. And that's where we're at right now.
100%. And so, look, the Hurricanes have been Bobrovski'd twice. Okay, and that's just something that we have to deal with. But understand, how about Freddie Anderson, a goaltender who was basically dogged for what happened in Toronto, which was not his fault. The team in front of him hung him out to dry. And yes, every now and again he would allow those soft goals and stuff, and that became part of his reputation. But understand, he didn't have any help in Toronto. Like, he just didn't. The defense in front of him was a shadow of what we have now. And so Anderson in that 4 overtime game was amazing. That one stick save where he's prone and he's flailing backwards with his stick and still manages to get something on it. There were so many times I was like, oh man, this game's over. And oh my God,
he had 2 paddle saves and a stick shaft save in that game.
Like, he was just fantastic. And people questioned a little bit. See, some did, some didn't, about Ronta coming in net. I think it was a good decision to have him in there to give Anderson the rest, because they're going back to Anderson for game 3, and I'm expecting another great performance. I think he's been fantastic, and he needs the shout out, to be sure. We're getting close to time to wrap up, so instead of talking about the Western Conference,
can you guys hear my kid in the background? By the way, he's online. He's playing video games.
No, it's all good.
Okay, good. I just worry because he gets worked up when he starts dropping F-bombs if somebody's rating his base. So I just got to make sure. The troubles of doing shows from home as he gets online. He wants to play, so.
Isn't that the way? So we're gonna wrap things up now. But Joe, I'm turning this over to you. Let people know where they can find you. You've been a fantastic guest in the Storm Cellar.
This is why we don't plan. Sometimes I think things, we have a general outline and we kind of see where things take us, and it ends up being good content. And I feel like this is a classic example of it's not my lack of preparation, Joe and Ray. It's my Rod Brindamore organized chaos theory of podcasting.
There you go.
That's the way.
That's exactly the way it is. Joe, where can everyone find you? Give us everything people need to know to stay in contact with you, because
and to find your new
wealth of knowledge, right? So lay it all out for us.
Yeah, so we're available wherever you get your podcasts. All you gotta do is look up OVIES and Giglio, two names that are hard to spell, which makes it really easy for Google searches. But thankfully, with the news over the last 3 weeks, Google has definitely filled that out for you as people have been looking. So yeah, we're available on all the podcast platforms. And the show, the podcast, we release it every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. That's our release schedule right now. By the time we get to football season, it might change a little bit. We might add something to that. We might have to add emergency quote unquote emergency podcast as we see fit. But right now it's Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. And we're available on YouTube as well. You can look up OVIES and Giglio on YouTube. Smash the subscribe button, as I like to say. And people often ask, where should I listen? What matters more? And I'm like, it doesn't. It all goes into the same pool. So if you're listening in a podcast, that counts. If you're listening on YouTube, that counts in the general sense of, how many people are consuming the product. And, the other thing about these online, unlike radio, again, it's much more to the point. The one thing that I want to make abundantly clear with what we're doing, it really is what we were doing on radio, just all in 1 hour, as opposed to spread out over 3 hours. And I feel like that format allows you to listen to it when you want to listen to it. and continue it on later on the day if you want to, and whatnot. Podcasts all take different forms. I'm not saying there's one right way to do a podcast or a wrong way to do a podcast. Sometimes people really enjoy the banter that happens in the early portion of a podcast because you feel like you're connecting with those folks. But really, radio, having done it for over 20 years, informs me and how I want to communicate and how I build a community with an audience. And that's why I get to the point. When we start the podcast, we're starting the damn podcast. It's, hey, that's Giglio, I'm Ovies, and the Canes are down 0-2. Let's get into it. Because you got to give the people what they want, because the attention spans are a little bit different for what we do. And that's why I keep stressing the only thing that's different is that we're just not on the radio. Everything else stays the same. So you can find us on social media. You can find us, on podcasts and YouTube. And we'll be doing some, we'll be doing some fun stuff. We got some merch. We knocked out an arrangement with Breaking Tea to sell t-shirts, and we'll probably do some, stickers and contests and various other things. Maybe I'll put together another NHL 94 tournament in the future for a nice prize. That sort of thing. So these are all things that we've got cooking right now. But the first things first, we gotta get the show going, and then everything else will figure itself out.
Excellent. And I'm sure it will, because with the content that you've shared with us, you get more of the same. Look, in Calgary, I didn't have the bandwidth to pick you up before. But guaranteed, we're going to be listening to you now.
Yeah.
Because, man, what you've brought to the table for us today, absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Joe and Brad. This is a little different, right? This was there's a different vibe to it, a different feel to this
was not as sad an episode as I thought this might be.
Which
is good. Nobody wants to listen to Tomorrow at the Tailgate like, oh, Brad, Ray's sad. That's
no wailing or gnashing of teeth, right? Like, we actually kept it up, and it was great.
Yeah, and that's no joke. I honestly still feel good about the series.
I do too. I
really do.
We're coming back with at least one more.
I think it's come back tied.
100%.
I got my Stormy socks.
Caniacs and Jerks, get those tickets for Game 5 and raise the roof again, just like you always do. Brad, fantastic podcast episode, and there's something missing though, isn't there?
Go Canes.
Go Canes.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Ray and I greatly appreciate your support in helping us produce an informative and fun podcast. As always, we'd like to say that we believe hockey is for everyone. Whether you're a Caniac or a bunch of jerks, doesn't matter, as we're just a couple of jerks anyway. We would love to hear your questions, comments, and suggestions. We will do our best to answer anything hockey related. You can reach us via email at stormcellar97@gmail.com. On Twitter, we are at stormcellar97, and on Facebook at facebook.com/stormcellar97.